Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We look like we got a full house. Yep, that's 100% of the audience can now see and hear us. Somebody's got some feedback. Okay. If you've got any microphones on, mute them when you're not speaking, and that should help. How's that? Yep, that's better. Right, Dr. Adam Reed, External Affairs Director at Suez. Welcome. If you're on the wrong webinar, you can turn off anytime soon, but hopefully you're here for COVID-19 and a conversation with peers and I'd like to say experts, but none of us are experts at this, are we? We haven't got an epidemiologist on the call. What we have got is some waste practitioners who are living this at the front line, and really this is an opportunity for Suez to bring together some of you to talk about those experiences, hear from from the CIWM, hear from DEFRA, or at least from the conversations some of us have been having with DEFRA, and to share where we think the guidance may be going, what we think best practice might look like, and how we're overcoming some of the issues around communicating with the public, the messaging that we're using, the services that we might be having to prioritize, if not now, then maybe next week, and just where do we see this going over the next month or two. So I've got some eminent specialists, some excellent conversationalists, and some real expertise in IT with us. So hopefully you'll get Jarno Stedt from Westminster, Trevor Nicol representing Cambridgeshire in its broadest sense, and the CIWM, and Lee Richardson from Doncaster, and myself. I'll chip in from a Suez perspective when the opportunity arises. What we're going to do is give each of the panelists 3 or 4 minutes just to explain where they are on the journey. What are they doing at the moment to deal with COVID? What have they implemented? What are they considering? Where do they see the next big issue? What messaging would they like to share with others that are facing difficult times? And then thankfully, I've received an enormous amount of questions ahead of time from the audience. So thank you very much. We could be here for several hours answering them all, but we'll try and pick and mix. And what we will do is make sure that we do finish on time and we share all of the questions and all of the answers after the event. And that includes the questions that are answered in tomorrow's session, because we have a repeat session with some different panelists tomorrow. So we'll share all of that, capture it together and circulate it off probably the end of the week, if not the beginning of next week, so we're all on the same page. All I ask, if you've got a good question and you haven't already sent it in, then I am ready to take questions via the panel that you should see on your little dialogue box. So click on questions, and right away, it will be anonymous unless you specifically say who you are. I don't mind, I won't call you out, but I will respond to questions as they come in and make sure that the panel are challenged and are kept to the theme of today, which is dealing with COVID and all the issues of service operations and prioritization. So that's enough from me. Don't be shy in sending in your queries. So let's go to the one person I can't see, which is Jarno Stedt. Jarno, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us about which hat you're wearing today, and then give me a little 2 or 3 minutes about how you see operationally what's happening and what you're doing and what maybe the sector's doing. Cheers, Jarno.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, apologies. I didn't get through the firewall to join with a video link. So thankfully, my good old trusted landline saved the day. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to everyone. I'm here today more with my NORDO hat on. That's the National Association of Waste Disposal Officers, and we look after the client side of the waste, the local authorities with waste disposal responsibility. So that's mainly the county councils, the unitaries, the joint waste disposal authorities, the partnerships, etc. And in daily life, I'm the waste and recycling manager for Westminster. In Westminster, the situation is very much under control. Most services are running. The only slight change that we've made is to bulky waste collections, where we're not collecting from inside premises anymore. So we ask the residents and the businesses to just place it out on the street from where we will collect it. Other than that, we've seen a dramatic decrease in tonnages because we pick up a lot of waste from businesses. Most of them are closed. Some of them have ramped up operations. So the hospitals that we service, healthcare providers, as well as food businesses, including some restaurants that have switched to delivery-only modus. So it's very much a changing picture. I sort of expect to plateau this week, plateauing as in we sort of reach the max of our tonnage decreases, which will sort of give us a bit of an indication as to sort of what lies ahead. Staffing levels are fine at the moment. We're running sort of between sort of 5 to 10% absence. We have got a large workforce, so if needed, we can use resources from, say, street cleansing or other services to support the waste and recycling collections. On the Nordo front, the situation is very varied. Some authorities are suffering to quite an extent because a lot of their workforce is off. Also, issues around haulage of waste, that delivery drivers might not be available, and some boroughs are seeing, especially in London, are seeing a shortfall of staff. There are a lot of agency staff members available, so the employment agencies for drivers and loaders are very well stocked, especially in the London area, due to the layoffs from other sectors. We are in constant discussions with DEFRA at the moment to ensure that they give us the flexibility to make local decisions where needed, but also provide guidance on things like PPE, essential services, etc., without becoming too prescriptive, because that might fire back when certain authorities can't make the decisions they need to make. So yeah, that's everything in a nutshell. And I've seen some of the questions already, and I'm happy to go into that at a later stage.
Thanks, Jarno. Okay. Really useful. You're different from a lot of local authorities with your Westminster hat on because you have got so much commercial.
Yeah.
How different do you think the experience is out there with your Nordo hat on? I mean, you're going to be at the one extreme now. What are the 2 or 3 key messages that you're hearing from your members?
Key messages, there are a lot of concerns around social distancing of crews, availability of staff on the collection side, the disposal side. There are worries that some material recovery facilities, for example, might be impacted by the absence of staff. It's a very labor-intensive process, having pickers on lines, etc. And when a MRF can't produce the quality anymore, it's of output materials, mainly paper and card, it's problematic, and the facility might have to reduce inputs or shut down altogether. Also, that changing waste collection systems, for example, by co-collecting waste and recycling, has sort of seen some issues with composition at certain plants. It's a very varied picture. There is still a lot of stuff going on in the background between DEFRA, the ESA, the likes of Suez, Veolia, as well as the waste networks, to make sure that the advice that's put out is usable for everyone, and because there is some sort of misinterpretation sometimes of current guidelines.
Thank you. Excellent start of a 10. So let's go to Lee. Lee's at Doncaster running an operational service. Very different from Westminster, I can tell you. I've done them both recently. Lee, what's happening in your world? What's keeping you awake at night, and what have you been doing about
it? A huge increase in residual waste and recycling being presented for collections at curbside with residents staying at home. At the moment, we've seen probably like a 2% increase in recycling that we've got. We've actually got additional vehicles on the rounds at the moment as well. I think we've got under 50% out on refuse and just over 50% out on recycling, just to keep up with the demand and keeping in the social distancing rules as best we can. The crews are obviously really concerned, but they've got a really positive attitude at the moment into trying to still get the job done. They appreciate what needs to be doing. Similar figures, really, we've got about 10% of the workforce off at the moment, both in relation to COVID and non-COVID illnesses. So we're trying to manage that. I mean, Suez obviously do our collections in Doncaster, so we're not an in-house service. Suez have made sure that we've got enough agency in to cover for drivers, loaders, etc. We've also put out, because we're all working to business continuity at the moment in Doncaster, our street scene service, which is in-house, are able to provide additional resource if required, both drivers and loaders, obviously once they've been trained, etc. So we're trying to put lots of things out at the moment. We're finding it difficult to try to communicate to residents. Our comms teams are just wanting to go down social media. not everybody's on social media. They're hoping that the press are going to pick things up from social media. They don't always pick things up from social media, so that's been fun and games. I think for us as well, managing expectations with elected members has been a massive one for us at the moment as well. You know, obviously they're under pressure from their constituents around about ceasing certain services. So we've ceased our garden waste collections. They're still free of charge in Doncaster at the moment. That didn't go down very well. Obviously it's really nice. We're coming up to Easter, it's spring, the garden's growing, and it's like, well, we're all at home in our gardens. Why did you stop the garden waste collections? Okay, well, should we stop your garden waste collections or should we stop your residual waste collections? I don't know. Let's have a debate about that one. But for us to try and put the social distancing in, we had to make that decision early on to cease the garden waste collections. We've got quite, like I said, we're non-chargeable in Doncaster, so we've got a lot of resource there straight away with vehicles, drivers, loaders, etc., etc. So that's what we did, but it doesn't stop people from ringing in and complaining the fact that they're not getting the service. Also, in conjunction with that, we've also shut the household waste recycling centres. That's provided by third parties, well, not Suez. Again, it's the same thing. Why have you shut the household waste recycling centres? We tried to keep them open, to be fair, for as long as we possibly could. But unfortunately, you know, residents were not adhering to the social distancing. They weren't adhering to site instructions by the staff. And it just got to the point where we thought it was actually just unsafe to operate them. Even by trying to let 2 or 3 in at a time, we were causing major issues on the highway. We've had the police involved, so it's, you know, it's all been good fun for us. I think the one really good thing to come out of this for us is the fact that we tend to get quite a lot of bad press around about bin collections and missed collections, etc. But the one thing that is actually working really well for us at the moment is actually kids drawing pictures of rainbows and handing them to our refuse collection crews, which has been amazing. Obviously at a distance of 2 meters, I might add, or putting things up in windows, taping pictures to bins, and our social media team have picked up on that and have shared that quite widely, obviously with like parents' permissions, etc., where we've got kids in there. So that's been really, really well received, because like I say, normally it's just like, oh, my bin's been emptied, you know, you've not done this, you've not done that. And actually at the moment it's like, oh, my bin's been emptied, you're doing this and you're doing that, and we're all like just shouting, yay, that's brilliant. That's a really good one. So from us, I think, you know, like I said, the crews at the moment are happy that we've put extra measures in place by trying to add the extra rounds in, so that we are down to driver and 1 and a bit, like I said earlier. We're really trying to get that nailed down to driver and 1. It's difficult trying to get the loaders out to the rounds as well, so we're looking at some resourcing with our pool cars that we've got within the council and offering those up to Suez. Any minibuses that are not being used at the moment as well for school services, we're trying to offer those up if we can, for Suez to use. So I think between us we've got lots of resources, and I think it's, for me now, is how we manage that between the private sector and the local authorities to try and actually deliver some consistent services for residents now.
Thank you, Lee. You've left me with a challenge. You gave me a smile earlier, which I like. You know, there's some really positive news out there about, you know, the public re-engaging with waste management as a frontline critical service, and actually, you know, they're doing a fantastic job under very difficult circumstances. And you know, there's nothing better than having a pat on the back, or in this case, a rainbow in a window as a proverbial pat on the back. That's brilliant. I'm going to come back to how do we get the resources right and how do we share. There's some really interesting things going on in the industry at the moment, looking at how do we take what were C&I crews, that whether they're working for the big waste companies or they've been working through, you know, the smaller regional players, how do we make a pool of them available to local authorities that may or may not need a resource for 1 week or 6 months or whatever it might be? So there's quite some interesting discussions going on with DEFRA and the ESA at the moment, which is quite interesting. So I'll come back to that. But really interesting to see how collaboratively, and not only with us as your contractor, but with other third parties, you're trying to work manpower with vehicles, with frontline services. So thank you for that. Trevor, last panelist, okay. 2 hats. Introduce yourself and let me know how you see the world and what's taxing you at the moment.
Okay, so I'm the president of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. Is my side other day job, but my main job, or the one they pay me for anyway, is head of the shared waste service for Greater Cambridge and shared waste service. What's City of Cambridge and South Cambs. What's a really rural district. So we suspended our garden waste service quite early, so a week ago. And what we felt that it was better to suspend early and have a consistent service for our residents rather than fail. So that went down reasonably well. Actually, we allowed Facebook to police itself, and people were really good. There was the normal people who complain, but they were, I would say, jumped on quite quickly by other people that are put back on there. We've also suspended our bulky collections. We've had up to about 25 to 30% off at any one time, and we're actually now seeing some of those people returning back to work after they've had their sort of 14 days. So whether that's people that have added, whether they've really been ill or they're just really concerned, I'm not quite sure. We're a fully in-house service, and I take it as very caring. Labour Council on one side, Lib Dem Council on the other. Our employees are the first thing we think about. So we moved to a driver plus one operation after a lot of debate and discussion on Saturday and Sunday. So I had staff in rearranging all our rounds to work to driver plus one. And what we've done is we considered doing a driver plus 1.5, I would say, so of having people going out. And our concern was once people get to the end of an estate, they will just jump in the cab and go back again. So we've provided extra vehicles. We were able to do that as we've suspended our garden waste, what gave us the vehicles, but we also have a reasonably large trade waste operation, and we've seen that with all the colleges. We collect from all the colleges in Cambridge. With all of them closing down, actually we've seen a reduction on those. So we've had quite major changes. We are getting support from the public. I think people have been really been sort of really understanding. Luckily, we had a couple of full page ads over the last couple of weeks in papers that we already had booked for our trade operations about encouraging more people. So those ads were pulled, but we then just replaced it with telling people what we were doing and why, and apologising, but getting the support. So we're seeing lots of rainbows on bins and getting that support in. That's working well. And the local radio have picked up. So I think I've been on the radio now 3 times in the morning with basically, here you are, you've got 3 minutes to say whatever you like was near enough. So they've been really open, just the odd question to keep the conversation going. But basically, they've been really supportive in that way. And I think it has shown that, say, actually supporting our crews first of all and allowing them to get to drive plus one has been difficult, but actually the crews have appreciated that change, and that's worked really well with when we've seen the wish guidance about going in that direction. So basically, as soon as that was published, we rewrote our rounds at that time.
Thank you. So we've already had a number of questions come in straight away, and I think I should pick the 3 of you up quite quickly on this driver plus 1, 2 metre social distancing within cabs. So there's a question, A, how consistent do we think that is across the sector at the moment? So I might aim that one at Trevor and Jarno for a quick response, but then I want to go into just how deliverable is a driver plus 1 or 2 metre social distancing in your experiences as a threesome on the panel. So I know what Suez are doing. We're trying to go 1 plus 1 wherever we possibly can. We're conscious that there are some circumstances where we still haven't quite got what is the support model that goes around that, you know, whether it's getting the additional crews out, or how do we ensure, as Trevor said, they don't come back in the cab because it's habit. We're looking at rerouting rounds. We're looking at extra vehicles where we can. We're looking at subsidiary vehicles that wouldn't normally collect rubbish or recyclables, but they could use manpower from a ferrying perspective. So just quickly, let's start with you first. How deliverable is 1 plus 1, and are you expecting that to be deliverable ongoing in terms of social distancing over the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever? Lee.
Going to be a massive challenge for us. Obviously, to try and get driver and 1 out on our rounds, we'll probably need about upwards of 38-40 collection vehicles just for residual waste on its own, which is basically our entire fleet of vehicles. So to do that means obviously we can't put out any recycling service, so it means a change to that service. So if we can't get any support from the third sector, if you like, we spoke earlier, didn't we, about private sector assisting where the CNI waste has dropped off. is basically, if we can't get any support from those for vehicles, then we're going to be really struggling. Even to put out a recycling service on a 4-weekly collection, we'd probably need, it was about 15 to 16 vehicles. So yeah, if actually it's mandated that we need a driver and one, then it's going to be really difficult for us to deliver all our services. I know what you're saying about the crews. I mean, they're like a little family of their own, aren't they, ultimately, even though, you know, it's usually a driver and two, and obviously that they're very familiar with themselves. Actually, even the whole team actually really pulls together in situations like this, like at Christmas when the rounds are split, etc. And yet it is very, very difficult, even if they've got a load of following behind. It's really difficult for them not to put the bins on at the same time, even at, you know, on the back of the vehicle. So there's still, it's how do they maintain that distance when it's actually second nature to them? It's a difficult one for us.
Cool. Trevor?
So we've got a reasonably large trade operation. So whilst that's down, or mostly down, and suspension of green, we can do it because, as I say, a reasonably large service. We've sort of given a commitment that we will try to get something back and up and running by the 4th of May on green waste. What that looks like and whether we can do that, but that would be causing us some of the difficulties. We have to get that back. I suppose one of the things we're hoping for is by the time we get to that time, a number of our staff will have had COVID-19 and back to work, and it's whether that driver +1 could go to driver +2 if you know that they've all gone through that process. So some of this is about pushing for testing. We're on the list as key workers to get tested, but how far down that list, and it depends on whether we're testing 8,000 people a day or 25,000 people a day. So I think some of that is where we're looking at about, we can maintain it in the short term, but how long that goes for is going to be the difficulty, really. But I think we've been quite clear, driver +1 needs to be driver +1. It's not driver +1 unless you can't be bothered to walk down the hill, really.
And Jarno, what's the feedback coming from London in particular?
It's an interesting one because the social distancing advice, it mainly sort of relates to the public. So you know, avoiding people in public spaces, and waste management workers are classed as key workers. So, you know, it's no different than in a hospital. It will be very difficult for NHS staff to observe social distancing, and you know, you have to rely on other measures to reduce infections. So for crews, for example, even though sort of, you know, the social distancing advice that is, you know, given to the public doesn't really apply to those key workers that are there to provide a you know, a necessary service. But, you know, reducing infections, for example, through appropriate PPE, and I know that that's a major issue for a lot of authorities and a lot of waste contractors, that, you know, PPE is just not available to the extent it used to be. Some authorities have resorted to getting crews to pick up their keys of their trucks in a staggered way. Some of them have resorted to, especially, you know, those collecting bags, to pull these up in advance, so have crew members go around, or members of the street cleansing service go around collecting bags, putting these in big piles so the crew can work in a different way. I've heard stories about crew members following collection rounds, also increased disinfection of vehicles, wiping sort of touch surfaces, cab dashboards, etc. down, as well as sort of a number of other measures where, you know, that these decisions are sort of taken on a local basis of, you know, perhaps crew members meeting their driver on site and walking with the vehicle, which is, you know, suitable for urban areas, but for rural areas it might not be an issue. And then also, you know, reducing crew members from, you know, a driver and two loaders to a driver and one, and sort of operating around on a slightly different basis.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting. We've been asked this quite a lot, both in conversations with DEFRA and ESA, but also by our customers. And, you know, we are trying to make 1+1 work wherever we can, but we understand that there's a trade-off there potentially in some locations. I think Jarno's already alluded to some of the things that you can do to try and keep your cab clean and to reduce any potential risk of passing the virus. The other thing, of course, is, do we want to be limiting the, you know, when the vehicles come back and there's handovers, you know, we want to be limiting the amount of staff interaction at critical points like that as well. So I think there's a lot we can be doing to progress this. But a question that's arisen from a couple of the
Sorry,
audience already. Oh, sorry, Trevor, go on.
Yeah, I think there's lots we can be doing, and I think a lot of us are doing lots of that. So it's not about doing one thing. So the hand washing, wipes, jowls, keeping our crews separate, keeping our crews together if they're together as a crew, staggering starts, dishing out keys differently. All of those we can do. The problem is it's about perception. What will add on to PPE and masks, but actually what people perceive. And I think we've had a number of people come in as concerned about them being in a crew with somebody else during that time. Whether they're at any greater risk or not doesn't really matter. It's about how people feel, not necessarily whether it's actual factually correct. You have to have both of those balancing. It isn't just say the scientists say this is the right thing to do. You have to have that, and then you have to work out that these are human beings that we're asking to come and work. And it's the same with doctors and everybody else. They're putting themselves at greater risk, because if we want to follow the government guidance, the guidance is to stay at home, and that's what we should all be doing. However, these people are stepping up and doing a service that's needed as a key service. So we have to consider our staff. As I always say, all I want at the end of the day is if I'm going to send out 200 staff, I want 200 back in the same number of pieces I sent them out with, and hopefully they've emptied the odd bin along the way. But it's actually having people back, and that's the same now as it ever was.
Good point. And absolutely, staff health and well-being is absolutely critical, followed by the public's health and well-being. And I think whatever we're doing here is about reducing risk and reducing interaction to the bare minimum. There's a point raised here about segregating cabs, and I saw that the co-op over the weekend were busy putting up I don't know, were they acrylic, were they plastic? I don't know, I didn't read too much detail, but to make it a more confined experience for the till staff in their shops, to reduce any possible infection passing, because there's no touching of hands or breathing of air. Have we thought about some really interesting modifications to cabs, or is that just not workable? Any of you? Jarno?
I think you have to look at that in a local context, and it might be a solution for certain types of collections, estate rounds where you've got a driver and one. If you're still operating on a driver and two, that's going to be difficult, because you need to have multiple compartments within the vehicle, and also, is it technically feasible to put this in? And putting screens up at a till is something completely different than a specific cab of a specific make of dust cart that you're using. So it could be. I don't want to exclude it, right? It sounds that yes, it could be feasible, but we have to see how that works in practice, and then also how you're going to manage the surfaces of those compartments to prevent any potential infection that might be present on those surfaces.
So,
and Trevor, when you answer, there's also a suggestion that some of the unions are arguing that there should only be a driver in a vehicle and no +1, even if the +1 is spending a lot of time loading. So how do you feel about that as well?
So I think it's going to be difficult to put compartments in there. We have somebody suggested big clear plastic bags, so we just take them up and drop them in. So I don't think we can do compartments. Where we've done our action plan, and here's our 4 pages of action plan that we developed, and what we're doing, what we could do, and why we aren't doing stuff, with details and references in there. We had that discussion with the union. So this week we've had with both our main unions, we've sat there and talked it through, asked what else could we do, what's not practical, why, what don't your members want. So I think some of that is about, we're in it together. So it's about, we can't find the solutions on our own as individual officers, but hence why these kind of calls. But also the unions in most cases are there for the safety of their members. We need to work with those. It has to be practical. If we went to driver only, I think at which point we would end up not being able to provide a service. So I think we just have to be realistic about the greater good of people and the safety of our individual staff, but also the safety of, through hygiene, of us having a collection service. 120 years ago, that's why we have a service that we have now, and that's why it's a statutory service, because it's about hygiene. We have to remember that as well as the other things that are going on.
Good messaging. I'm going to jump to another question because there's so many coming in. We're not going to do them justice, but yeah, let's move. I want to move away from cabs and social distancing for a moment, and I want to talk about HWRCs. Lee's already mentioned this briefly. There's quite a bit of debate at the moment about keeping them open. What is it a critical service? Is it a critical journey? Certainly, the Suez position on HWRCs is they should remain closed. We were on social media pretty much all day yesterday saying they're a non-essential service, they're a non-essential journey, they should be closed, and we should only be considering them being opened if there's a failure on the collection side. That means that we've then got a health and safety and a potential public health issue that can't be solved. So, but other people are claiming, well, you could open them for wood, or you should open them for other materials. Why aren't they there for textiles? So where do we stand on this? Lee, you brought it out first. So give me some thoughts about HWRC provision.
Yeah, I agree with your stance, Adam, on that. I think ultimately they are non-essential at the moment. The refuse collection service is carrying on as it is, as is the recycling service. And it's what I mentioned earlier, it's coming into spring now, some nice weather, people are at home, people seem to be clearing out the gardens, the garages, and basically what do? You take everything to the tip. And they were just becoming overly used to the point where, when I've got sunshine on my head, look, just coming to the point where we couldn't actually operate them safely. It's non-essential travel. Like I mentioned earlier, we had the police out to us on a couple of our sites just because of the fact that we were causing an obstruction to the highway. We even had an incident at one of our sites where there was a traffic incident outside of one of our sites before it even opened because they were queuing to get into the site. Now, you can't tell me that's essential travel. So, when we're trying to keep people away from other people, and you look at what the supermarkets have done now with social distancing in that respect of trying to keep people apart. They're actually having to physically man, you go with your trolley, you're standing 2 meters apart from each other. We're trying to do that on HWRCs with cars effectively, and we just haven't got the space to do them on ours. Our sites are traditionally, old dump it sites whereby they're not, we used to just collect green waste and house residual waste, and obviously over time we've expanded and expanded and expanded them to the point where they're not actually big enough to take all of the materials that we need to segregate on site. We haven't got split level sites, we haven't got a super site, they're all old, what we referred to previously as dump it sites. So they're just not geared up for that amount of traffic coming through the sites to be able to get people in and out safely.
Thank you. Trevor?
Yeah, so Cambridgeshire, they're closed. They're all of ours are closed. It isn't essential travel. I think that's key. Even if people were disciplined, we shouldn't be encouraging people out. We've done lots of work on social media, but also, as you said, on the radio, about telling people that that actually, yeah, they can do the clearing out, but just put it in the corner and be ready in the future. This isn't going to go on forever, but don't put it in the bins. Don't worry about taking it to the tips as such. But we've also thought about garden waste, where we suspended ours quite quickly. It is about just don't cut your grass, or if you are, great, build a compost heap, put it in a black bag in the bottom of the garden. I think the phrase I used is just let it go a bit more natural. So we just have to get that message across that actually, yeah, this isn't important. You shouldn't need to go there, and it's not just about hazard to our sites. It comes back to that traffic incident, what would have happened outside your site, Lee. That means the police came, maybe an ambulance, and actually they've got better things to do rather than managing our sites. So I think we have to stick with that, and we have to be very clear message to residents. And I think people are getting it now, but we just have to be firm. And I think if actually where most of them are now closed, it's probably an easier message. And that, in one way, it's a shame it wasn't quite clear quite early that no, these need to close, and that helps. The other thing we're using is it gives us some capacity of storage space if we need it. So that is another licensed site that if we have to store material, that does give that capacity as well as freeing up those staff to help other places.
Well, you answered somebody else's question already, so that's great. Yes, those sites could well become interim storage and provide an ancillary capacity whilst we're transitioning to a new norm. Jarno, you've been involved in plenty of national conversations with me in the last 2 weeks, and HWRCs seem to be, quite an emotive topic. Where are you seeing this going? Is full closure the right move, or are we going to start seeing some opening potentially?
I would say for now, absolutely. We don't want to sort of put more people on the road with cars full of garden waste and clear outs and then fill up sites that are then struggling to get rid of the material, because it's not just it's one thing dropping it off at the HWRC. It needs to go somewhere as well. And is that haulage capacity available? Is the treatment capacity available? It just puts further strain on the disposal system, because those sites have been so busy before they were closed. I was hearing stories in certain areas that had like up to a large authority in the UK that had 50,000 visits just over one weekend, because everyone is at home and thought it was a good idea to clear out. That's the sort of thing you want to avoid. It can wait till later. And some authorities might have to use their sites for something else. They might have to transfer waste there, or store waste, or use it to benefit the collection services if needed. And we've had some conversations with the Environment Agency, for example, as to will you make an allowance for some authorities to use their sites to transfer certain materials so the system keeps moving. The other thing, of course, is you might need the staff from your HWRC to back up other elements of your operation that are down. So Nordo especially, we don't class them as necessary. And at the moment, they are just creating, if we had them open, they would just create extra traffic, huge issues around social distancing, surfaces being touched, handrails, barriers, etc. And that's the sort of, that's an infection risk, and that's something that we need to avoid. And what HWRC's taken in general, it's mostly bulky waste, it's clear out, it's rubble, it's garden waste that can wait until later. And when the situation improves in the UK with regards to infection levels and where we are, then you might sort of perhaps look on a case by case basis if it's sensible to open them up again for certain waste streams or for all waste streams, and put in rigorous social distancing measures. But the HWRC situation is the same what I've heard in Sweden, in France, and in the Netherlands. Everyone is at home and let's have a clear out, and then let's all stand in a big queue at the HWRC. So it's not purely a UK issue. It's playing all over the EU, and some countries have taken similar drastic measures and say, no, we're closing these sites down. You have to wait until later now.
Thank you, Jana. What's interesting, I think, and I've been parted in some conversations recently, that the HWRC debate is becoming quite a local and quite a political one, and I can understand why there are some drivers to open in certain locations. But from a pure health and safety perspective, I just don't see the need. But I think there's a question coming here though. Are we seeing? There's three of you on the call, me four. Are we seeing an increase in side waste or additional residual at the curbside yet? Are you predicting it? Is that a concern, or are you hoping that your messaging about waste prevention, home composting, don't do the DIY, you don't need to yet? Do we think we can curb that potential increase? What do you reckon, Lee?
I think we've already seen an increase of about 2% now in just a week of increase in residual and recycling presented at curbside. Initially, I suppose, luckily for us, from a treatment point of view, because I always goes to MBT for the residual waste, because the commercial waste is declining, we're actually evening out on the tonnages going through that facility. So actually, that's a plus for us, that we're not actually trying to overcapacitize that facility. But yeah, I mean, we've put lots of messages out with the Love Food Hate Waste, the home composting. But I think just with people staying at home, and the fact that, again, the panic buying last week probably didn't help as well. So we're seeing a lot of unavoidable food waste that's actually gone into bins as well. To the point where we've had to put extra vehicles out to cope with the demand. I would hope that now that it does plateau a little bit, now that we've seen that peak. But I suppose for me, checking with our treatment facility, we've had no change in composition to waste yet. So we've had no garden waste going through there. But then again, it's only been 1.5 weeks. So I don't think actually we're at that peak yet when people actually realise that, actually I want to get rid of this stuff now, like my garden waste, for example. And even though we're trying to suggest not putting it in your black bin, it might inevitably end up there anyway. So yeah, I think we're not actually at that peak yet, but we're trying to get some consistent waste messages out there.
So we need to run this in 3 weeks' time and then reflect on some of these questions where we will have some evidence and some data to support what's going on. Trevor, Jarno, anything strong on that particular question about side waste, increasing tonnages and capacities?
Yeah, a little bit more increase in material is coming through. But there again, some of that is about people have cleared some of their garden waste bins out, especially if there's food waste in there beforehand, but nothing major. And actually what we find is our recycling is also seeing it up, but people are at home. So yeah, that in one way that's positive because it means they must be doing the right thing. So.
Yeah, no. In London, I was party to some discussions early end of last week about the London councils issuing some guidance to residents through all of the social channels and the local authorities. One of which was non-essential travel. One of which was HWRC should be closed. But they were also talking about don't do the spring clean, don't do the DIY that you might normally do at Easter. We are in unprecedented times. Help your authority and the services to stay afloat. Are you seeing that happening now? Or do you think that's working?
I'm sort of. I hope it's working. I can't sort of speak on behalf of the whole of London, but I know that some areas are seeing, more waste left on the street. So people are, presenting stuff for their household collections instead of bringing it to the HWRC. I can't say that that's a trend, though. When I look at Westminster at my own tonnage, the sort of the rounds that operate in the more residential areas, they're up a little bit, but not huge volumes. And I can only assume that people are not consuming extra and are not generating huge amounts of waste. But then again, we're only a couple of weeks in, right? I don't know what's going to lie ahead. I do feel that across London, all the boroughs are working together now. There's a very strong pan-regional approach at this point in time. We've got daily contingency calls with all the waste authorities in London. What's the situation? Where do you need help? Can we pinpoint people towards the help they need? And especially, we're supported by the London Waste and Recycling Board, which is part of the Greater London Authority. They've been very helpful, and I think if you keep on getting that consistent message out, yes, it will start to grasp. And you can see some of that advice, for example, already ending up with managing agents of large blocks or housing estates that are sending it to their residents and saying, oh, actually, no, don't do this. Use your recycling wisely. Don't contaminate. Wait with anything that can be thrown out later. So that message is coming through, and it's other elements like managing agents are picking up on it now as well, because as you might be aware, in London a lot of the waste is managed by the managing agents, so that the managers of the blocks, of the flats, of the estates, groups of housing, etc., and not necessarily by the waste producer. And those gatekeepers, as we refer to them, have got a key role to play communicating with our residents alongside the local authorities.
Thank you. South Staff's big shout out. Thank you for offering the new strap line. Think at the minute, do you really need to bin it? It's got a lovely ring to it, everybody. South Staff said we can use it, so use it.
Well done.
Quick question.
Sorry, just on that one, I think what we probably need is that support now from RAP and actually some real national campaign stuff. They've got all the stuff. It's just rerunning them and running them out there, because it is love food, hate waste. It is about minimise, slim your bins, all the things they've already done. You're seeing it more and more on sort of BBC, their adverts in between programmes, or ITV, where proper adverts. Actually, this may be the time to say, can we just run one of those? There's one on toilet paper about not wasting it. Not about panic buying, but why not about waste? And maybe that's where we really need to push DEFRA and RAP as their retained sort of agent, or whatever they are nowadays. But that may be where we can get it out, and I think that may be where we want to put some pressure on as well, because that will help us all.
Good messaging, and I know RAP are on the case. They're not on the call, but they're on the case. I've been party to some of those conversations. I'm expecting to see some recycled iconography and messaging happening soon. So quickly, I'm conscious of time. I've had a big question that's been hanging in the ether for a while. It's about recyclate and other materials and end markets. Is the closure of some of the end markets potentially going to create a problem for collections of some materials, whether it be wood, food, or recycling, or are we making the decisions at the front end of that collection system that's then going to determine whether those back end markets close or not? I suppose it's a chicken or egg. Should we be making the decisions, or is it the end markets that are going to be forcing us because they're not operating? Jarno, any quick thoughts? And I mean quick.
Yeah. The thing is it really? Yeah, I know that the blast furnaces for metal recycling have closed because the automotive industry is closed, so there's a reduced demand. But there's still, there were millions of tons of paper leaving the UK every year to be exported, and if there's really such a demand in the UK for more recovered paper, then the stuff is there, and it's not just I appreciate the commercial element has collapsed, but there's still a lot coming out of the regular household stream. So the material is there, and is it really so pressing that paper recycling mills are running out of material? I'm not entirely sure whether if we stop collecting it that it's going to lead to huge shortfalls. Recycling services are still being provided at this point in time, and on an ad hoc basis, a authority might decide to just clear whatever needs clearing as mixed waste, and then pick up recycling collections later. No one wants to suspend these services for months and months and months.
Thank you. Trevor, anecdotal feedback suggests from Scotland and Wales that they're going to prioritise recycling collections over all others. Surely that's out of line with the guidance that WISH, CIWM and most of us have been talking about on this call. Does that feel right?
I think that's wrong, to be truthful. I think we have to go back to our basis. We are there about public health and hygiene. And also we'll end up collecting lots of recycle. It will be poor quality and contaminated. So I think the industry can cope with a loss of material for some of the time, but that's about us talking to the industry. We are not the industry, neither is Suez, neither is about how we talk up and down, making sure that we're talking to the manufacturers and the suppliers of raw material or reused material, and find out what they want and how they want it done and what can they do with this. So hopefully this might help us to actually become the industry we want to be, rather than the 16 different industries we talk about as under the waste industry. So we just need to make sure we're doing that over the next sort of period of time.
And thank you. Lee, one key message you'd like to share with your peers before we have to wrap up?
Oh, there's probably millions, isn't there? But I think more from a waste point, but more from a personal note, I think it's just, keep smiling, because I think we'll end up getting through this. Well, we will end up getting through this eventually. So I think if we stay together and get some consistent messages out, I agree with Trevor about the rap. The toilet roll ads in between the BBC is quite entertaining. But yeah, I think, let's keep smiling and we'll all get through it, I think.
One key message for you, Trevor?
I think it is just let's work together on this. And don't beat yourself up that we're not doing what we did last week, because I don't think we'll be doing what we did this week next week. So every day's a new day at the moment, and it really is. We're measuring things in minutes rather than hours or days at the moment. So I don't really know where we're coming from. But I think talking and sharing is what we need to do to more of this, really. And don't worry about it not being quite right, because who knows what right is now.
Very good. And Jarno, where's your one key message takeaway from today?
To be aware that there's a lot of things playing in the background. There's a lot of conversations taking place with DEFRA, with the ESA, with the large waste companies, the local authority networks, etc. So, if you are looking for more advice, it will be coming. And also speak to your neighbours. Reach out to authorities around you in other areas. Nordo has got a forum set up for its members, so you can reach out. Help is there. You just sometimes need to ask for it.
So thank you. I'm going to plug the WISH guidance document that came out the other day. Search it, which talks about social distancing. It talks about 1+1. It talks about HWRCs. That's the one we've all been contributing to and responding to. CIWM, Nordo, ADEPT, LARAC, the ESA, other trade bodies exist, of course. All I'd like to say is that guidance should be out by the end of the week, updated to reflect true realities. We're expecting DEFRA to issue some guidance by the end of the week on some of the uncertainties and the grey areas that still exist that have been being called out on social media after the last 2 or 3 days. So don't be shy. Watch this space. All I would say is feed in through your networks, whether it's the local authority networks or you want to come back through Suez and your client basis, if you like. We're here. We're happy to talk. We're happy to share. There's going to be some notes written up after this. There's some questions I didn't get around to answering. I'm apologising now, but I will take them into tomorrow's session. Even if you don't join me, I'll try and get an answer for you. So yeah, we live in interesting times. The world is changing, but we're going to change together. We're going to adapt, and we're going to put a smile on our face to to reiterate Lee's message, and I'd like to thank you for your time joining us, your time for putting in some really good questions, and more importantly, the time of the expert panel for sharing today what is a difficult operational time for them. They've probably all got to go rush away and get some vehicles out of the depot. So appreciate your time today. We'll probably run another one of these in due course in a few weeks' time because the world is shifting. But in the meantime, don't be shy in sharing your thoughts and helping each other. I've been Adam Reed at Suez. Thank you, and thank you to the panel. Goodbye.